Pain. Physical suffering or discomfort caused by illness or injury. The other day I was thinking about this word and I found myself wondering, is that a suitable meaning of that word? The variance of pain is so great and expressive. We call it burning or tearing or shooting pain. It could be as moderate as sore toes from stuffing our feet into shoes, or as terrible as a gaping wound. We have a million different ways to communicate what physical pain can and does feel like, but even then I don't think that satisfies the word. Makoto Shinkai is a famous anime film director best known for his work on Your Name, Garden of Words, Weathering with You, and a few more. He's incredibly popular in the anime sphere to the point where a film directed by him is all but guaranteed to be a smash hit. The job of a director is to oversee the creative process of a production. Most of the time it's done by a group or a collective that go through the thing step by step as a team, but Shinkai does it all independently. He writes all of his own screenplays alone and doesn't make adjustments from feedback until he is satisfied with his own first draft. This unorthodox approach when it comes to production isn't only incredibly impressive, but it also ensures that we have a very intimate view of how he chooses to implement emotion into his stories. And what really interested me about his portfolio is how varied the movies interpret the singular idea of pain. Now, I'm not making the claim that each film is intentionally an exploration of a different variance of pain, and all of it was done with that broad thematic idea in mind, but I do find it kind of amazing. So many of his stories explore some variance of pain in such a grounded way that the supernatural elements of the story can feel easy to connect to or accept. Your Name is about time and how missing our quote-unquote proper timing with other people can really hurt. So many people cried during this film or felt the heavy emotions associated with those ideas because on some level we can all relate to it. Weathering with You feels so reminiscent of a longing for something that the world itself seems to deny, as if the skies were giving and taking away. Of course, his films don't always use these supernatural elements. One of my favorite works of his is Garden of Words. It's got this brilliant atmosphere, and everything from the music to the art direction really settles you into this somber world. The constant rain is so reminiscent of the female lead who can't seem to catch a break, and the narrative really dives into some of the more intimate and sensitive emotions that can come with being deep in a life in which you're unsatisfied and barely pushing on. It's very easy to settle into that viewpoint, where age itself is the source of the conflict. His stories are easy to identify with. Everyone feels like they've missed their timing with something at least once, and there are millions who feel like they've gotten so far into life with nothing to show for it. And I think that's where the definition of pain really starts to have so much more depth. While we can define so many different types of physical pain, I think it's much harder to accurately liken them to the emotional pain that these types of stories can evoke from us. We say something stabbed at our heart or tears at our mind because it's easier that way. It helps us express what we feel, but in a somewhat lackluster fashion. Like you're communicating through mirrors to another person, relying on their empathy to fill the real meaning of what you're saying. If I asked you to describe loneliness, how many words do you think it would take you? Depending on the person, it could range from 5 words to 500, and both would technically be correct. But what these movies do, and why I think so many people feel during them, is because they throw out trying to condense all our emotional pain into words and instead explore them through a full experience. I think that's why we call some movies speechless, or we need time to collect our thoughts. The emotions we feel just can't be put into words, and so we explore them through these movies and rave for hours about how a piece of fiction felt. A lot of the most popular anime movies aren't at all in the battle shonen genre. There are big ones like JJK Zero or Mugen Train, but the vast majority of these are beautiful and emotional films. The Forest of the Firefly Lights, I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, Your Name, Howl's Moving Castle, Look Back, things of this nature. Many of them explore some form of pain that lets us feel so incredibly connected to them, whether the crux is age or rainy weather. And this leads me to one of my favorite standalone movies and expressions of this ever, A Silent Voice. The story of A Silent Voice is incredible, and if you're anything like me, experiencing it for the first time probably left some form of impact on you. It was the first time I had thought about what pain would feel like from the person who administered it, and what it would be like to grow up and realize the weight of all of your past mistakes. And I think that idea rings true for pretty much anyone. I'm sure we can all list people who have harmed us in the past, but I sometimes wonder if my list is longer or shorter than the people I myself have unknowingly harmed as I've lived my life. Obviously, the extreme bullying displayed in the story of A Silent Voice wasn't accidental, but I think that how everything is conveyed is really easy to relate to. Shoko's deafness, her inability to understand and be understood by the others around her, is something that many people know. And Shoya's inability to move on from his mistakes and his isolation due to the ostracization he endured is also very tender and emotive. Everywhere in this story, you can see pain. It's a love letter to those who have found themselves on the edge, staring down into the abyss, and a spotlight aimed at the unloved to remind them they can still be seen regardless of how hard it is to connect to people. You can feel it in the way Shoko struggles through the depression that comes with loneliness, that pain in and of itself spreading to the rest of her family. Her little sister, who obsesses over dead insects and animals, lives in the fear that Shoko may take her life, hoping that seeing the deceased creatures scares her away from the prospect of death. Shoko's mother, who has struggled with having a disabled daughter, a woman who has needed to harden herself in order not to crack under the empathy that a mother has for a child wading through a rigid and unforgiving society. You can see it in the way Shoya's body communicates awkwardness, and you know it by the giant X's that plaster themselves to the others around him that he can't connect to. This emotional bloodbath takes us on a journey that explores the wounds that these characters bleed from and lets us experience how they slowly begin to bandage those very injuries, each one relatable and easy to resonate with. And I don't think that there's any section quite as powerful as the climactic scene in which Shoko attempts to take her own life. There's a lot that I think is really powerful about this scene. Shoko's deafness means that since she's looking out at the fireworks, all she can experience is how they feel to her. She stands on the balcony and takes them in for a little before slowly climbing to the edge, unable to hear Shoya's cries. She jumps, and I wonder if for a brief moment she regretted it. Maybe she felt the air under her feet and the wind against her face and thought that she would trade anything to be standing on the balcony once again. Maybe she did, and maybe she didn't. But when Shoyo catches her, you can see a tiny spark of life reignite in her soul. Seeing Shoyo in this moment gives her a fuller picture of life. She fights to put a hand on the ledge, inching her way back up only to trade places with her savior, leaving him to fall and get put in a coma. And the following events for the next several minutes of the show show us the splash effect of suffering. Yuzuru and her mother crying at Miyako's feet just has so many overlapping emotions. There's guilt for what happened to Shoya. There's that sense of familiarity between parents who have both looked at their children knowing they stood on the edge. There's empathy on both ends, bringing with it the relief of Shoko's failed attempt and Shoya's survival. But alongside it is the pain that comes with the potential of their family member's death. Naoka attacking Shoyo and berating her because of the pain that Shoya might die, and Shoko's mother interfering add to this mix of emotions, with the centerpiece being Shoko herself. There's such a brutal truth on display for us to see through her character. Shoko is getting to experience the life that she would have been leaving behind for other people. If she had been successful in her attempt, all of this pain would have been shouldered by someone else. Watching her beg for forgiveness and stew in her own depression, guilt, shame, and the condemnation of others can easily be overwhelming to those who watch. I'm not so unempathetic that I would call the wounded selfish and blame them for bleeding, and I don't think that A Silent Voice is either. I don't think there's necessarily a passing of judgment from the message of the show onto Shoko. It just sort of is. Just the overlapping feelings of hurt people trying to define, justify, and make sense of their pain. These feelings are too deep to accurately be conveyed in a 4-letter word, so we put them into a 2-hour movie where words simply aren't enough. Not for the characters, and certainly not for us. And I think that's what makes these types of stories and this kind of anime movie so amazing. It's an author, a director, musicians, and artists collectively communicating not only through their art medium, but through pain itself. There have been so many great minds to do this and make us feel connected, but sometimes I wonder what it really looks like inside one of the heads of these titans. And if we're talking about anime films and the creatives that make them, we of course need to talk about Japan's titan of animation, Hayao Miyazaki. Miyazaki is an interesting man. When I first started researching him, I'm not exactly sure what I was expecting. Studio Ghibli has been responsible for some of the greatest and most critically acclaimed films since they started putting out movies, the most recognizable and popular being written and directed by Miyazaki himself. The type of person who created such wonder-filled movies with such passion had always been a curiosity of mine. But as I started to research and the more I was around him as an icon, the more of an anomaly he seemed to be. If I needed to paint you as broad a picture as I could with as few words as possible, I would say that Hayao Miyazaki is a pure artist. Everything about his lifestyle and reputation oozes that sense of blistering creativity. He's a writer, artist, director, and so much more. The 2016 documentary titled Never Ending Man follows the life of a then 72-year-old director Miyazaki. It covers his retirement shortly after Studio Ghibli published The Wind Rises, this period in time meant to mark the end of his creative pursuits. However, he isn't able to leave it all behind like that. Although he is quote-unquote retired, the documentary follows the production of a short film called Boro the Caterpillar that Miyazaki created. It was also his first run with CGI, which was used to help bring his vision to life, able to achieve what his own limitations didn't allow him. And what I see in this man, reading his interviews and watching his various short series or documentaries, is a person who is only alive with his art. And you can feel that from the effort he puts into conceptualizing Boro with dozens of sketches and ideas that haven't even been given a story. As he gets a team together to work on the project, that excitement grows, and being surrounded by the young artists revitalizes his spirit. He remarks how exciting everything is and how much he loves to create. However, portraying him in only that light would be a bit disingenuous. Perhaps not a fault of his own, or perhaps just because of how true artists are, Miyazaki was famously difficult to work with. He himself even admits to many of his flaws when it comes to working in a team. He abides by strict standards and will not accept anything that doesn't bring his vision to life in a way that he can be proud of. Those standards are so extreme that even though director Miyazaki says he trained up successors for himself, he also says he destroyed them, claiming that in pursuit of bringing his vision and art to life, he devoured their freedom and creativity, so much so to the extent that there are no successors left in the industry. And everything that revolves around that idea and director Miyazaki has that same sense of impending extinction. This documentary not only covers the incorporations of newer methods of animation, but also following a man grappling with his own mortality. Death is only a concept to those who haven't lived with it looming over their every action. Director Miyazaki talks about his old age and death often, mostly through jokes to ease the tension of the idea, but you can tell something about it bothers him. Perhaps less the idea of death, but more the idea of not living, which is very strong in how he does live his life, creating well past retirement and constantly pushing himself to make something that people are able to connect to and breathe hope through. Even if his heart is beating, he does not live if he does not create. What really solidifies that idea to me is the fact that while this documentary follows his 2013 retirement, director Miyazaki didn't stay retired. In 2013, Studio Ghibli released The Boy and the Heron, in which Miyazaki directed, a feat he hadn't been expecting to if his words in Never Ending Man are to be believed. But that alone proves to me more than anything that creating is his way of life, and it's almost essential to him. It is his never-ending endeavor. And when looking at the art that comes out of that lifestyle, things can get a little jarring. Miyazaki is a self-proclaimed pessimist, and his hatred or disdain for things can range as broadly as modern anime's absurd escapism to his own son. His eyes are excessively critical, even hateful to many things, with their sharpest scrutiny continually aimed at art. His entire career can reflect this. The way his strictness consumed the writers and artists that worked with him, or his perfectionistic nature on display through The Never-Ending Man, really convey his critical nature for art, even when it's something as simple as a short film. He also dislikes how much the world is changing and longs for days where plants and wildlife take their reign once again. His pessimistic nature is a popular trait of his, but the extent of it is all the more interesting when placed up against his art. A lot of his movies are filled with this sense of childlike wonder, and you can tell through just the production of Boro the Caterpillar short films that all of it is intentional. Even if sections of the story don't make as much sense to the adults, they still feel beautiful to children. Every lovingly crafted piece of his films, the simple tilt of a head or the embrace of two people seen in a Miyazaki movie, is designed specifically for the innocent souls of the young. One of the most telling quotes I could find of him actually comes from an interview published in 2005 around the release of Howl's Moving Castle. He says, quote, "Personally, I am very pessimistic. But when, for instance, one of my staff has a baby, you can't help but bless them for a good future. Because I can't tell that child, oh, you shouldn't have come into this life. And yet I know the world is heading in a bad direction. So with those conflicting thoughts in mind, I think about what kind of films I should be making." In spite of his views on the world or his general hatred for many things, Miyazaki still believes in the value and beauty of an innocent human soul. And I think that his movies take on a more protective nature under that light. Maybe not something that necessarily shields the true nature and real negativity or horror of the world, but a reminder of what things still can be. Small flickers of light in the darkness. Director Miyazaki still has the ability to see through the eyes of a child, but with the mind of an aged, pessimistic man. And I think that the acceptance of pain in the world can do a lot for the authenticity of a beautiful piece of art. If we look objectively and we call the dark tragic, we have the privilege of calling light beautiful. And many times, whether we unconsciously or consciously yearn for or create art that follows that idea, it's what we end up experiencing. When I think back to a lot of those brilliant movies, I remember and feel the pain. But I can also remember that pain being swallowed by the emotions that follow. Seeing Taki and Mitsuha miss their timing in Your Name is sad, but what's equally as joyous is seeing them finally ask each other their names at the end of the film. As agonizing as it was to watch Violet struggle against herself through the story, it was beautiful seeing how she could understand what I love you really means. Not all endings are happy, and in truth I think it's better that way. Garden of Words, I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, The Forest of Firefly Lights, Look Back, heck, even things like Arcane's finale, all of them end in a somber way, or maybe even a bit unresolved. They're stories with great heights and deep lows, but I think what's beautiful about those types of endings in particular is that, well, they end it all. Every series of pain or chapter of happiness needs to have an end. It reminds our suffering that this too shall pass. And that isn't a matter of ignorant optimism or needlessly a pessimistic view of how pain works. It just is. Things get better and worse. They go up and down. And for some of these brilliant movies or instances that bring out our wounds and remind us that we can bleed, and even more that we can heal, it isn't just painful, but it is beautiful. And while we constantly try to associate pain with the effects it causes us, it completely negates the inherent beauty of some of these more inclusive ideas. Ideas that whenever I think about in particular, I can't help but be reminded of the bad movie scenes in Chainsaw Man, or maybe even better, these panels in Berserk. And I don't even think you need the full context to feel the power of this scene. In this world of demons and horrors beyond comprehension, a little girl begs a master swordsman to take and protect her from pain and evil. In response, he has her look around and take it all in. All of the evil. That is the reality of life. The objective truth of pain. And while this massive soldier holds this girl safely in his cloak to shield from the immediate danger, he gives her only one line. There is no paradise for you to escape to. There is no world, no haven, no area where there is no darkness. Pain will be continually part of life, but just as true, just like in that Berserk chapter, eventually the skies clear up, and we see that this too shall pass. And if pain is inevitable, so is hope. So is peace. Because as much as I felt the scene of Shoko's attempted suicide, I also felt this. Until next time. Pain. It is a lovely word indeed. It's acquainted with damp pillows and soft eyes. A cold that makes one hide in their sheets. It's the monster that sits with writers staring at a blank page deep into the night, or musicians who rest their hands on their keys, unable to play a note. It finds company in isolation, and grows far stronger when cradling the lonely. It finds itself nestled between angry outbursts, or fueling silent envy unknown to the world. It is not content to bruise or draw our own blood, but others. It leaves us searching for the tenderness in another person's soul, reminding us of the power we could have if we were to damage them. Pain. What a lovely word. It is the tinder of hope. It's what we feel in the words of a song when one wounded soul reaches out for another in the darkness. Its existence reminds us of a shared experience, proof that we're not alone in the waiting of our storms. It is the forerunner of happiness, and the currency by which all comfort is made a treasure. It is the birthplace of strength, and the ancestor of discipline. It is what drives us to grope for salvation in our blindness, and what encourages the hands that find us to search. Yes, what a beautiful word indeed. Until next time, keep dreaming.